podcast number 2 of Once Upon a Crime. I'm Iolani Mangoba.
And I'm Bethany Racette.
And today we will be talking about the discrimination towards the Latinx community.
Yes. We'll be starting in 1848 when the U.S. won the Mexican-American War, and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo marked the end of the war and granted 55% of the Mexican territory to the United States.
Those who stayed in what was now the U.S. territory was granted citizenship. In the early 19th centuries, political events in Mexico made immigration to the U.S. popular. Anti-Latino sentiments grew along with immigration. But with that, Anglo-Americans treated Latinos as a foreign underclass, stereotyping that if you spoke Spanish, you were lazy, stupid, and undeserving.
The main Anglo-American sentiment was just like Americans first. Like when you're getting a job, it has to be the white Americans first.
And I don't like that because
Yeah.
if you have the better
Like credentials.
yes,
Yeah.
the better credentials, you should have the job.
Exactly.
Unless you're over, but that's okay too because they're more experienced than you
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
And
It was just, racism. And in the late 19th century to the early 20th century, so we're looking at late 1800s to the 1900s, there was the California Gold Rush. White miners begrudged former Mexicans to share their wealth yielding by California mines, and sometimes did vigilante justice. So if they saw like a Mexican in a mine, they would, is that what happened?
basically, is that like if the Mexican found gold, the Mexican wouldn't be able to
I see.
take it. It's more like finders keepers. You're mining on my field. I'm going to take what's mine.
Yeah.
So that was very, I don't know. It's just very like greedy and selfish in a way.
100%. Another way that they would punish Mexicans is if they were fraternizing with white women or insulting white people, they would be attacked on suspicion. And this really mirrors what we were talking about in our last podcast. Go back to the last podcast with Emmett Till when he was brutally murdered after like flirting with a white woman,
Yes.
which was later found out to have all been a lie.
And good thing that you mentioned that because in 1911, a mob of 100 people hanged a 14-year-old boy named Antonio Gomez after he was arrested for murder. But instead of having him have jail time, the townspeople lynched him and dragged his body throughout the streets of Thorndale, Texas.
Yeah, that really does mirror the Emmett Till story.
I tried to find more about this Antonio Gomez person, and there was nothing to be found on the internet.
Yeah, I think that's going to tie in later in the podcast.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about something about that.
All right.
So, let's see, where are we? The deportation of the 1920s to 1930s. There was an anti-Mexican sentiment during the Great Depression when a lot of people were struggling to find jobs. So, of course, with the white American first sentiment, they did what they could and they pushed as many people with Mexican heritage out as they could. If you didn't have any sort of proof that you were an American, you would just be sent back. Yeah. Anglo-Americans accused Mexicans and other foreigners of stealing American jobs and were discouraged and forbidden from accepting charitable aid. The Chicanos, people of Mexican heritage who are Americans who stayed, lost their jobs, and because the Americans made sure that white Americans had the first right to work. So the Chicanos couldn't pay taxes and were ultimately pushed into growing segregated areas called barrios, and they all flocked to the Southwest.
And from the deportation, it forcibly removed up to 2 million people of Mexican descent, and 60% were Mexican citizens. And thankfully, this ended in 1936. But that's so rude. How can you push out 60% of American citizens out of the U.S. because of the color of their skin or their origin here in the U.S.?
It was all about like self-preservation. You know, like they really base their racism on their own like economic troubles, which is just so terrible.
It is terrible because
And even though it ended,
yeah,
it didn't end.
But the thing that still amazes me is that this ended in 1936. It's 2022.
Yeah.
It's not even 100 years.
Yeah.
We haven't moved on.
The Voting Rights Act was passed in 1975. Yeah, right? Like, it's not long. It hasn't been long. And we all, like, push it off. It's like, oh, you know, it's all in the past, but it's not. The repercussions are still seen in our CJ system and just culture and society in general, honestly. Like,
we did not move far ahead in time.
How many people of Mexican heritage are CEOs today? Do you know? I can't name any, but I can name, like, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos. Like, we have all of these people that we talk about, but there's, like, I don't know. So for Chinese Americans, my friend, she talks about the bamboo ceiling. Oh, yeah. Like, there are all of these barriers to higher level jobs for people of minority groups. It's ridiculous.
Damn.
Yeah. Back to Hispanic culture, though. So even though the deportations ended in 1936, we still had segregated schools. Latino students were expected to attend separate Mexican schools throughout the 1870s up until, 1947 is when the Mendez versus Westminster case took place, but honestly we would have to say Brown versus Board of Education was when segregation in education really ended. But I brought up the Mendez versus Westminster. Let's talk about that. So the Mendez family were of Mexican heritage, and they wanted to attend the white school because the Hispanic school was honestly like not that great.
Sylvia Mendez described the curriculum in her Hispanic school as vocational for boys and home economics for girls. So basically, girls had to do the stereotypical things, female roles as a sewing, cooking, cleaning, while the boys actually got to be like hands-on and be like learning how to
fix
cars, engineers, carpentry, all those fun stuff.
But it was really like preparing the Hispanic boys for their future in hard labor and the Hispanic girls for just like housekeeping.
Yes.
So it was sticking them and kind of barring them entry into like educational fields or higher education in general as well.
So basically, you're saying that girls need to stay home and boys do all the work. That's basically what it was. And I still don't like that rule. I still don't like it.
A lawsuit took place to allow the Mendez family to attend the white school, and the Mendez attorney David Marcus took some social science approach to evidence and said that segregation led to feelings of inferiority, and that inferiority would lead to less productive Americans in our society. You hadn't really seen this type of justification for anti-segregation before Marcus took the stand. And as the legal proceedings dragged out, the white school offered to allow the Mendez family entry to the school, but the Mendez family refused it because it would only affect them and not their other Latin American students.
The U.S. District Court Judge Paul J. McCormick agreed with the plaintiffs and ordered that the school district cease their discriminatory practices against the pupils of Mexican descent in its public schools. Said to have set the stage of Brown versus Board.
Thurgood Marshall, he argued with similar justifications in the case and wrote about Mendez versus Westminster to the NAACP, and then he later worked on Brown v. Board with similar justifications. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
That is interesting. I didn't know about that.
But that exactly leads into our next point. We didn't know about this. Before researching for this week's podcast, we didn't know about this court case, and I wondered why we didn't know about that, so I looked into it. And basically, since the late 1960s, conservative activists have been shaping our history books. Texas holds a monopoly on American textbooks. This has been
Of
the way
course.
for like literally forever.
Of course.
So if you want to write history, you lobby with the Texan textbook companies. And so the Washington Post wrote, for publishers, it was not economically viable to write one book to appeal to campaigners in Texas and different versions to sell elsewhere. So the result, students across the country got books that told U.S. history from the perspective of a group of white, God-fearing conservative Texans. Right? Right?
This is why we never learned like the right things. We always learned about the whitewash
Yes.
version of history.
Yes,
That's
American
not cool.
students only get this skewed version of the truth that hides the bad and presents a colorblind narrative of the patriotic history. This is something that President Donald Trump tried to bring back, but it's still full-fledged. He wanted a more patriotic history books in response to like calls for critical race theory taught in schools and all of that. But he was like, no, we need patriotic history. But that has been seen since before the 1960s.
For real.
Yeah.
For real. And this is why we don't like really get to know like the in-depth truth
Yes.
about history.
Yeah, like the Black Codes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Black Codes, the Texas Rangers, not the baseball fans, but the actual Texas Rangers that went and actually forced Mexicans to go out of the U.S.
Yes.
Oof. Funny how small little details can be cut out of history.
Right? And
It's so crazy.
these make deep cuts. Like,
Yes.
I feel like Mendez versus Westminster is really important.
Yes.
Like,
And this
that
is still
stage.
known as like the unknown history because we always look at the African American community versus the white, but never the white versus any other minorities here in the U.S. And that's like so crazy.
Yeah.
To me.
And honestly, this is like the most publicized unknown story because Sylvia Mendez got the presidential, what is it, Medal of
Freedom,
Honor?
yeah, freedom,
Medal of Freedom?
Yeah, Medal of Freedom from
Barack Obama.
Yeah.
Barack Obama. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Right?
That's so crazy. When did she get that award? What
It was
year?
2011.
Dang.
Yeah.
3 years into Obama's term.
Mhm.
That's crazy. But that's it for our podcast this week. But stay tuned for podcast number 3 as we deep dive into Asian American history.